My name is Ryan Costello. I am head of operations for ProSearch, head of operations in the EU. I also manage our data privacy services offering. ProSearch is an eDiscovery provider, and we kind of focus on innovative solutions across the board in discovery. So focusing largely on bringing certain aspects to the discovery process that are new, innovative, creative, thought-provoking, maybe certain things our clients haven't anticipated or thought of, or otherwise are struggling with a certain pain point or whatever it may be, and looking for a certain level of creativity in dealing with that. And we kind of thrive on that environment and that relationship with our clients. We've built sort of an enormous amount of trust working with clients in creating these sorts of solutions that really makes them sort of trust in us and very thrilled to work with us. So you don't typically describe eDiscovery as fun very often, but we try to look for that level of fun, that innovative creativity, and focus on that in what we do day in and day out. ProSearch is an American-based eDiscovery company. So we're based out of Los Angeles, California, and then we have our EU office, which I manage, which is in Dublin, Ireland, and we also have operations out of Hyderabad, India as well. We've been at eDiscovery for 2 decades, again with that focus on sort of innovation and creativity in the eDiscovery experience. Currently we're really focusing a lot on new data types and working with clients really at the cutting edge of what they're experiencing or dealing with or struggling with on a day-to-day basis. Of late, that has been, like I said, new data types, messaging data, things like that, and bringing sort of creative workflows and creative tools and solutions that focus in on that. Not only the collection, but kind of the ECA and initial review through to actual review based in the relativity platform, and then creative ideas and solutions around producing that information and kind of focusing on what clients specifically are looking for and what they need. And we've had really an enormous amount of success with that. One of the, again, as I say, I manage our European operations, so really our work across EMEA. And one of the interesting aspects of that is, up until a few years ago, sort of the stereotype was that Europe is a few steps behind the States in terms of eDiscovery, in terms of embracing technology, in terms of what they may be dealing with at that cutting edge or bleeding edge. I found over the past couple of years that that's no longer true. So the EU and EMEA has really caught up to the States. So we're seeing a lot of work that is focused on new data types. Clients come to us every day and say, we need to collect something new and different and novel. We don't even know what to do with this. What do you suggest? And we kind of work with them and come up with a way to make that data or those documents reviewable, get them into relativity, and ultimately find some way to ensure those are produced in the most efficient, most timely, most cost-effective way possible. So I've spent the bulk of my career in eDiscovery. I graduated law school actually in 2006 when the federal rules were amended to include electronically sourced information as discoverable officially, formally in the eDiscovery process. So I graduated kind of into this world of eDiscovery that was nascent at that time. I moved to Europe more or less permanently in 2009, so about 15 years ago. Throughout that time, I've worked largely for US-based companies. And I've had an opportunity to focus on data privacy issues and certain jurisdictional issues that we face in Europe around things like the GDPR and so on, which about 10 years ago was becoming more and more important for our clients globally. So whether or not the client was based in the US, if they had data and custodians and work based out of Europe, they were very, very concerned with the GDPR and data privacy. And so that became largely my focus for quite a long time. So in terms of some of the considerations around eDiscovery work that US-based practitioners might not be entirely familiar with, I think one of them certainly is concerns around the GDPR and data privacy. So where can you access data? How do you transfer data? What are the restrictions? What needs to be done in terms of compliance around that work? And ensuring that any vendors or third-party contractors you're working with are well aware of that and have gone through documented procedures to be able to handle that data, whether in country or whether within the EU, allow for that access and then support mechanisms for transfer, whether they're SCCs or whatever they might be. Now we have the data protection framework, EU to US, whatever it is, kind of considering the restrictions and limitations around that are critical. Second thing, again, kind of want to reiterate that the EU's stereotype is that there were some years behind the US in terms of sophistication and cutting edge level of e-discovery issues they're dealing with. That is no longer the case. So EU, UK, as I've mentioned, has really caught up to the US and is looking at the data types, messaging data, novel data types and so on, and dealing with those on how to collect them, search them, and produce them. So all this information that's now discoverable is very much a concern for EU practitioners as it is in the US, and now kind of on par in terms of that level of sophistication and innovation really that's required to deal with a lot of that. The third thing that I wanted to mention along these lines is, the EU in terms of regulation is kind of at a much different place than the US, at least in terms of the homogeneous view of it across Europe. So right now we're looking at things like the AI Act, which hasn't gone into effect yet. I don't think it's been formalized by the European Commission yet, but the final language of that has been decided upon. So getting a sense of that regulatory picture and what that'll look like for AI, interestingly, is very similar in many ways to the GDPR in terms of accountability, transparency, various aspects of human verification that be required in that, all of which I think will be directly impactful on e-discovery operations and considerations for various, generative AI-based tools or AI-enhanced review workflows and things like that in e-discovery. One of the other things that I wanted to mention about kind of what differs between EU and US e-discovery are responding to what we call data subject access requests, which in the UK and EU is huge. And that's a body of work that in the US we don't see as much. So as I mentioned, I'm 15 years kind of with one foot on either side of the Atlantic and have had an opportunity to work with both US and EU practitioners quite a bit. But I've also focused a fair bit on data privacy services and operations, and what in data privacy can be optimized from an e-discovery perspective. And the data subject access request has been a huge example of that. So at ProSearch we have an enormous amount of work dealing with these data subject access requests. So this is Article 15 of the GDPR, which gives a data subject the right to access their data that's held at a company or a corporation or an organization in any respect. That is applicable also to employees, current and former. And so we see a lot of these employee-based data subject access requests that come through where a data subject is requesting an enormous amount of data that relates to himself or herself. That can be in any number of contexts and can include any number of data types. So for organizations that aren't prepared to deal with that amount of data for those specific requests, can be enormously challenging. So what we've built is essentially e-discovery enabled workflows to be able to respond to those requests, so that work through the collection kind of working through the data types that we've been that we've received in connection with that request, helping a review team kind of optimize the review process to kind of pin or put a pin in, or really locate or pinpoint the specific data that's within scope of that access request, and then furnish that data to the data subject. Multiple aspects of that are very useful to bring an eDiscovery workflow to, and multiple aspects of that kind of sit outside the eDiscovery workflow as well. For example, the data subject is going to be getting pieces or pages or extracts of documents. They have no entitlement necessarily to the full document. They're only entitled to that piece of the document that contains their personal information. So it's a 7-page email. Their information is on page 3. People were talking about that individual. They will only get that page 3. And so finding a way to optimize that workflow from the collection to pinpointing the document, to finding the information about the data subject, to producing just that one page is something we've been able to build for our clients and have had a lot of success with that. Recently, so I'd say in the last 6 months or so, the UK ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, which is the regulatory authority, the data privacy regulatory authority in the UK, issued some guidance that said messaging data, so social media, but also data from sources like Microsoft Teams and so on, would be within scope of a data subject access request. So now, in addition to emails and loose files and other information that may have referenced that data subject, we're now seeing that messaging data come through as well. And that is a huge challenge for many organizations, because as you can imagine, post-pandemic, the amount of chatter that goes on in those messaging tools is enormous. So again, collecting, searching through, pinpointing that information and getting it to the data subject is another area we've had a lot of success with. And it's just interesting to watch that sort of take shape and so on. Those are also, as I mentioned, employee-driven DSARs, and are typically tied to, especially in the UK, some sort of employment controversy. A lot of times these are sort of pre-discovery exercises, the DSARs are, ahead of an employment tribunal case or some other employment-related controversy that's usually very problematic and very rife with some sort of controversy or other. So just a very interesting body of work that, again, doesn't exist stateside, that we've had enormous exposure to and experience with in the EU and in the UK as well. I mentioned this earlier, but one of the interesting aspects about artificial intelligence and AI is the way that the EU is proposing to regulate that. So there's the EU AI Act, there's other sort of market-focused regulations and legislation that they're considering as well. So there'll be a lot of considerations that organizations will need to take into account when they're considering various AI-enabled tools really across the organization, but in eDiscovery as well. And some of the main considerations around that are really focused on sort of a human aspect of verification to that. So certain things you can and can't do, certain technologies that are too high risk to consider. But I think most pertinent for eDiscovery is that human aspect of verification. So we're not necessarily talking about removing humans from the work that we're doing. What we're talking about is the work that we're currently doing changing. So how that might impact review is that instead of doing a linear review of documents, actually reading through documents and deciding on responsiveness in the case of eDiscovery, it might be things like crafting the appropriate or the correct prompt to pinpoint the information that one is looking for. You know, we're seeing a lot of pricing models that are focused on the amount of documents that a certain prompt might bring back. And so looking at ways to optimize that so your prompt really ties into the specific information that's sought, the specific sort of responses or outcomes that are desired, and how well can that be done, and whether and to what extent that becomes a skill in and of itself. So it's interesting with AI right now. I think it will revolutionize the way that we go about work. Things will continue as they are in some respects, but some of the roles, as I've mentioned, will change. And so finding a way to adapt to that will be critical for organizations. So this is both a huge opportunity as well as a challenge. So it's really one and the same. You can see this week at Legalweek, I think something like 85% of the sessions dealt with AI in some capacity or other. Even where it wasn't on the title of the session, some discussion of AI has come up. Nearly every single booth in the exhibit hall references AI in some capacity. So there's a real expectation on the part of clients that you have some sort of response to that you're considering AI-enabled tools or workflows in some way or other, and have a timeline for the implementation of that, some level of consideration about what that'll look like and how that'll impact the work that you have with your clients, as well as potentially lead to cost savings or efficiencies for them down the road as well. So those are some of the major considerations right now. And again, I think that if you're not considering AI-enabled solutions, you're really behind the mark right now. Again, you see it everywhere, but also everybody's talking about it. So what level of creativity and innovation can you bring to it to really optimize what this looks like, and do that in a clear-headed, sort of grounded kind of way? That's one of the things that we've really, that's been a strong point for us at ProSearch over the past 2 decades across eDiscovery. So we're bringing that to this AI consideration as well, and seeing what we can do along those lines. Again, I don't know how that is going to take shape, and my particular focus, being kind of an EU and US practitioner, is looking at the regulations and limitations around what we can do and what we need to be compliant to and what we need to be considering overall as we go forward. But again, that level of human intervention and verification, that's always going to be there. That isn't going away, but what that looks like may be very different from what people have considered up to this point. And it'll be very curious space to watch over the next month, 2 months, year, 5 years.